All right, Ange, let's go. Off to the Bass Strait. From the Gippsland region, about 4 hours from Melbourne, we're heading out to the area that made Victoria an energy powerhouse for decades. It's familiar territory for Ange Moore from the Maritime Union of Australia, after nearly a decade of working on offshore rigs off Western Australia and in the Bass Strait.
Actually drilling the wells and laying pipes out there, so yeah.
So you know what you know what it's like to be on one of these rigs.
Yeah, very much so. You know, they're not just workplaces, they're home for 6 months of the year.
Those homes are docks in the vast ocean. It's 40 minutes at speed on a relatively calm day before one of the 23 oil and gas platforms in the Bass Strait comes into view. For many of us, offshore oil and gas rigs are out of sight and out of mind. We're 35 kilometers off the coast of Victoria, and this is as close as we can get to this rig in the distance because of the 500-meter exclusion zone that's in place around oil and gas infrastructure. Many of the rigs in the Bass Strait are now not operational. Now they have to be removed, and that is not going to be easy. The whiting platform has been here for 3.5 decades.
What you see on these older platforms is crunchy decks that you walk over. You see missing handrails. You see pipeline ruptures, condensate spills. This is unfortunately run-of-the-mill.
For more than half a century, Bass Strait rigs have been a key source of natural gas. They supplied 70% of Southeast Australia's demand last year, but the wells are quickly running dry. Esso's plan for its first 12 platforms to be decommissioned is now before the federal offshore energy regulator. Depending on the depth of water, for some rigs, Esso wants to remove platforms and supports down to 55 meters beneath the surface. Below that, it wants to leave the legs, steel pile jackets in the ocean floor, and even pipelines in place.
There's no excuses to leave it in the ocean just because we don't know what to do with it. We know exactly what to do with it because it's being done in the North Sea, it's being done in other jurisdictions around the world, and there's no reason we can't do it here too.
But Esso says removing subsea infrastructure will actually harm diverse marine ecosystems that have developed since rigs were installed. It released this video showing sea life thriving on support legs and even on a pipe buried in the Bass Strait ocean floor. Esso told 730 in a statement, if we were to completely remove the structures, we would need to undertake significant dredging of the seafloor, meaning not only removal of these ecosystems, but significant impact on surrounding marine life. Professor Tina Solomon-Hunter is one of the nation's leading experts on offshore infrastructure decommissioning. 730 spoke with her in the energy hub of Bergen, Norway, where the removal of rigs is nearly 2 decades ahead of Australia.
So we've got a long way to go. We haven't even decommissioned any of our Bass Strait assets, which have been there since the 70s, let alone anything that's in the Northwest Shelf that has come from the 80s and 90s. So we've got a long journey ahead of us.
Solomon-Hunter hopes that journey doesn't include leaving parts of oil and gas subsea infrastructure behind.
The best scenario, and the one that's required by law, is to remove everything that you brought into the licence area unless there's a darn good environmental reason not to. So cutting it off just to 55 metres is not the best environmental outcome.
In the Gulf of Mexico, parts of 600 rigs have been left in place, converted into artificial reefs. Solomon-Hunter understands the appeal of that option.
The reason for that is simply cost. It is incredibly expensive to remove the installations. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. You know, the decommissioning industry is going to be billions over the next couple of decades. So you can see where the problem is.
But that's not all. Esso wants to bring the platforms back to where many were originally built, Berry Beach Marine Terminal in Gippsland. They plan to disassemble the rigs and recycle nearly all of the steel. But Barry Beach is next to the Corner Inlet Ramsar wetlands, part of the international treaty that protects bird life around the world. The largest intertidal mudflats in Victoria are here, and the habitat supports several endangered and vulnerable species.
I think that what's going on here...
Freya Leonard from Friends of the Earth believes recycling rigs at Barry Beach would be an ecological disaster.
What is the possible impact of Esso's plan on this area?
These platforms, they were built in the 60s and 70s, so they contain asbestos, they contain mercury and a host of heavy metals, as well as radioactive materials that have been building up within the works themselves. There is no sensible way that you can manage those sorts of pollutants in an area as beautiful and pristine as this.
Esso says Barry Beach Marine Terminal has an excellent environmental record. It told 730 the top sections of platforms transported here will not come into contact with the water at Corner Inlet. It also says the area where the dismantling will take place will be covered with impervious membrane to protect the environment. Friends of the Earth say the disassembly and recycling should be done nearly 200 kilometers away in Geelong, which already has large industrial areas. If that adds to the cost for Esso, so be it.
It's a bit rich for them to be penny pinching at this point. We think that they should put their hands in their pockets and do the right thing and make sure they've cleaned up the mess that they've created.
As gas in the Bass Strait runs out, more and more of these rigs will become relics of a bygone era of energy security. The debate over how they'll disappear is just beginning.